where walls don't just divide cities, they tear apart families, dreams, and freedoms. A world where silence is safer than truth, and escape could cost you everything. Welcome to a journey through one of the most tense periods of the 20th century. From the ashes of World War II to the heart of a divided Berlin, this story is one of hope, fear, loyalty, and quiet defiance. Together, we'll uncover the hidden truths behind the Iron Curtain. What was it really like to live behind the Berlin Wall? Through personal stories, forgotten resistance, and the soft echoes of daily life in East and West, you'll hear what textbooks often leave out. If you enjoy calming, immersive storytelling that brings history to life, make sure to subscribe. From secret tunnels to forbidden love across the wall, there are many stories still waiting to be told. So close your eyes, relax, and let's travel back to 1945. When the Second World War comes to an end, Germany lies in ruins, broken, exhausted, and divided. The victorious Allied powers, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, agree to divide the country into 4 occupation zones, each taking responsibility for rebuilding a section of the defeated nation. At first, there is hope for cooperation, a shared goal to rebuild. But beneath the surface, deep differences begin to show. On one side, the capitalist West, promoting democracy, open markets, and individual freedom. On the other, the communist East, led by the Soviet Union, with a vision of centralized power, state control, and ideological unity. 2 systems standing face to face. 2 ways of life, growing further apart with every passing day. Let's begin. Behind the Iron Curtain. The East. In the Soviet zone, a new system takes shape. The government becomes the central force in everyday life, deciding what gets produced, in what quantity, and at what cost. Private businesses are nationalized, property rights are restricted, freedom of expression is limited, and those who speak out often disappear into silence. Education, media, and culture are brought in line with party doctrine. A single truth, a single path, a single voice. Life in the East becomes marked by shortages, restrictions, and the quiet pressure of state control. But across the border, another story unfolds. The West. Meanwhile, the Western Allies take a different approach. Democracy is restored, and with the help of economic reforms and the Marshall Plan, West Germany begins to recover. Quickly, a new currency is introduced, the Deutsche Mark. Shops reopen, factories restart, jobs return. This rapid recovery becomes known as the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. People begin to rebuild their lives. There is hope, there is momentum, and there is freedom. But in the very heart of this divided land, a city stands still. At the center of all this lies Berlin, a city located deep within the Soviet-controlled East, but divided just like the rest of the country, into 4 sectors. Despite its position behind the Iron Curtain, West Berlin becomes a small island of Western values, free, democratic, and open, surrounded entirely by communist territory. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. In West Berlin, police surveillance, scarcity, and political repression, a single city split in two, a front line in the growing Cold War. Berlin becomes more than just a place. It becomes a symbol of conflict, of ideology, and of a world being pulled apart. Then, in 1948, the Soviets seal off West Berlin completely. All roads, railways, and waterways leading into the western part of the city, deep within their zone, are blocked. This event becomes known as the Berlin Blockade, a bold move designed to pressure the Western Allies. Their goal is clear: to force the West to abandon Berlin. By cutting off every supply route, the Soviets hope that the people will surrender to hunger and cold, and that the Western powers will eventually give in. But the West doesn't back down. The United States and Great Britain respond with something extraordinary: the Berlin Airlift, an immense operation to fly in supplies, day and night, directly into the isolated city. Planes begin to arrive every few minutes. For months, they land one after another at West Berlin's airfields, bringing flour, coal, medicine, and every essential item the city needs to survive. Through fog and snow, in narrow windows of time, with heavy loads and dangerous landings, the pilots keep coming. Relentless, precise, silent wings of resistance against Soviet pressure. West Berlin survives through the air, and finally, in 1949, the Soviets lift the blockade. The airlift has worked. Despite every obstacle, the Western Allies managed to sustain an entire city without a single bullet fired. The blockade fails, but its impact lasts. Trust between East and West is shattered, and the divide grows deeper than ever before. The creation of two Germanys. In 1949, the division of Germany became a reality. On May 23rd, the Western Allies established the Federal Republic of Germany, FRG, a democratic state in the West. The reason? The tensions between East and West have escalated to the point where cooperation is no longer possible. The introduction of the Deutsche Mark, the Marshall Plan, and the Berlin Airlift make it clear: the West wants to follow its own path. In response, in October 1949, the Soviet Union established the German Democratic Republic, GDR. In name, a republic, but in reality, a communist dictatorship tightly controlled by the Soviet Union. Germany is now officially divided into two states, two systems, two worlds. The SED party wasn't just a political party, it was the political party. The SED party holds absolute power. In the GDR, there's only one political direction allowed: the socialist path, as dictated by the state party. The SED decides what is best for the people, and anyone who deviates from this view is seen as an enemy of the state. There is no room for opposition, no room for debate. The economy is entirely under the control of the party. Everything, from factories to farms, from stores to transportation, belongs to the state. Production and labor are centrally planned. People don't work where they want to. They work where they are needed. There is little space for personal choice. And even education becomes a tool of the state. From a young age, children are taught the ideals of socialism. Critical thinking is discouraged. History, language, even physics. Everything is used to reinforce the party's ideology. Anyone who speaks out is watched. Then there's the Stasi, the feared secret police. They listen, they watch, they record. Everywhere, on the street, at school, at work, even at home. Anyone can be an informant. Your neighbors, your colleagues, sometimes even your own family. Suspicion grows. Trust disappears. The GDR presents itself as a worker's paradise. But behind the Iron Curtain, control, fear, and a lack of freedom reign. And as we drift further through time, the more the story begins to unfold. Because in 1953, protests break out in the GDR. What begins as a workers' strike in East Berlin quickly grows into a massive uprising against the regime. The demands are simple: better wages, less coercion, more freedom. The workers are fed up with living under harsh control, with no voice in the decisions that affect their lives. But the response is brutal. Soviet tanks roll into the streets of East Berlin. The uprising is crushed with violence. The result: more than 50 dead, thousands arrested, and a population that is reminded once again, resistance will not be tolerated. A clear message: the GDR will not tolerate dissent. The party is always right, and those who protest pay a heavy price. 1961, when the dream of unity turned to stone, and Berlin became a city split in two. Between 1949 and 1961, almost 3 million people flee the GDR. They leave the communist East through the only open gap in the Iron Curtain, the border in Berlin. Every day, thousands cross the city, searching for freedom, safety, and a better future in the West. It is mostly young people, doctors, teachers, engineers, students, people with knowledge, ambition, and hope. Exactly the group that is essential for the future of a country. The GDR watches as its population drains, and with each crossing, the regime loses a bit of its legitimacy. Until August 13th, 1961, everything changes. In the dead of night, soldiers close the border with barbed wire, armed checkpoints, and patrols. Berlin is split in half in a matter of hours. The construction of a wall begins. A wall not meant to keep enemies out, but to keep its own people in. Within hours, families are separated. Loved ones trapped on either side of concrete. Watchtowers are placed. Trenches dug. Armed border guards watch the wall day and night. Escaping becomes life-threatening. A city, a country, a people, divided by one wall. The Berlin Wall becomes the symbol of the Cold War. Hard, gray, and inhumane. Behind the wall, a different world unfolds. Life moves slowly, silent, controlled. The GDR presents itself as a socialist paradise, a model for the world. But the reality is much darker for many. The stores are often empty. Butter, meat, coffee, simple products are not a given. Those who get more have connections with the party. Privileges are not based on merit, but on loyalty. On the street, be careful. A casual remark, a wrong joke. It could be enough, because you never know who's listening. And what seems like a simple conversation can end in an interrogation. Your neighbors, maybe they are informants. The Stasi has tens of thousands of eyes and ears. Many are pressured into it. Others do it willingly. Distrust grows. Even friendship is not a given. Even at home, you feel the breath of the state on your neck. Letters can be opened. Phone calls can be listened to. A safe conversation does not exist. Privacy is an illusion. Your children learn at school about obedience, camaraderie, and vigilance, about the importance of the party. They sing songs full of loyalty to something they don't yet understand. And you dream of traveling, of family on the other side of the wall, of colors, smells, and opportunities, of freedom. But in the GDR, dreams are dangerous. Those who dream must remain silent, because the party is always watching. 1962, the moment the world held its breath. The Cold War reaches its most dangerous point during the Cuban Missile Crisis, after American surveillance planes discover Soviet missiles stationed in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. coast. A tense and terrifying standoff begins between the two superpowers. For 13 days, the world teeters on the edge of nuclear war. American warships blockade the island. The Soviets refuse to back down, and both sides prepare for the unthinkable. But at the very last moment, a deal is struck. The Soviets agree to remove their missiles. The United States promises not to invade Cuba, and disaster is narrowly avoided. But something has changed. The fear of total destruction lingers, and that fear slowly opens the door to dialogue. And just for a moment, we step into a quieter chapter. In the 1970s, the tension between East and West seems to ease somewhat. The threat of war remains, but the superpowers are talking. They sign treaties, make agreements, in an attempt to make the Cold War a little less cold. This period of cautious relaxation is called détente. Even between East and West Germany, more contact emerges under the leadership of Chancellor Willy Brandt. West Germany pursues Ostpolitik, a policy of rapprochement. Agreements are made about family visits, travel, and communication between the two Germanys. A little bit of hope on both sides of the wall. But in the GDR, the regime remains strict, suspicious. The leadership fears that Western influences will undermine the order. Freedom is and remains a risk. Yet, something slowly begins to emerge, a ripple of hope. Through West German radio and television, illegal, but widely watched. People hear about life on the other side. Freer, more colorful, more expansive. They dream of traveling, of love without borders, of reunification. The wall still stands firm, but in hearts and minds, it begins to waver. The 1970s brought a tentative peace, a softening of the Cold War's sharp edges. For a moment, there seemed to be hope, even amidst the wall that still stood tall between East and West. But, as the world paused and the leaders sought dialogue, something darker began to stir in the heart of the GDR. We will now explore why the promises of stability began to unravel, and why the GDR found itself in crisis. At the end of the 1980s, the GDR was increasingly in trouble. The economy is performing poorly. Central planning no longer works. There is little innovation, and production is lagging. The national debt grows because the regime imports Western products to keep the people satisfied. But these are paid for with borrowed money. At the same time, people are watching how different life is in the West through West German radio and television. They become frustrated, lose their trust, and then pressure comes from the outside. Soviet leader Gorbachev tries to save his country with reforms. Glasnost, openness, and perestroika economic reform. Both ideas are the complete opposite of the old communist system, which is based on control, secrecy, and centralized power. Openness, freedom. In the East, those had been forbidden words for decades, but Gorbachev wants to move forward. He sees that without change, the system will collapse. However, the GDR leadership refuses to move along. They close their eyes to the winds of change, and by doing so, they shut themselves off from their own people. The people want change. The party refuses. In other Eastern Bloc countries, Gorbachev's ideas are being embraced. In Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, reform movements are gaining momentum. Citizens are starting to demand more. Freedom, elections, open borders. The domino effect begins. Hungary opens its border with Austria, and suddenly there is an escape route to the west. Thousands of GDR citizens flee via this route. The images spread across the world. The pressure on the GDR regime grows by the day. At the same time, protests within the GDR itself are growing. In cities like Leipzig and Berlin, more and more people take to the streets. Peaceful, but determined. For decades, people feared this moment and avoided it. But now, they do the opposite. They take to the streets and protest, because together, we are strong. The party is trapped. They can no longer ignore what's happening both outside and within. And then, on November 9th, 1989, they make a mistake. A spokesperson mentions a relaxation of border rules, but the message is unclear. The people hear only one thing. The wall is open, and so, thousands rush to the border. The soldiers are caught off guard, and they let them through. No orders, no resistance, just pure joy. The wall falls, and with its collapse, the entire system crumbles. The discontent has been building, until one day, it becomes impossible to contain. And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Germany reunited. Family members reunite. After years, without words, with tears, the GDR ceases to exist. Germany is one again, but the past remains palpable. The control, the fear, the silence. That silence we whisper today, softly through, so that it is not forgotten, and so that freedom never seems taken for granted. Thank you for journeying back in time with me. History lives, as long as we keep telling it. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, your memories, your questions, because stories like these are not just about the past, but about who we dare to be today. Good night, and sleep.